part of it, for some time, I had felt like the marriage I was in wasn't really fulfilling for me, that there wasn't enough shared purpose. There wasn't enough, there weren't enough shared values. And I really began asking Spirit to bring forward a partner that would be someone I could work with.
Earth is a school for the evolution of consciousness. And so we're all, using the school analogy, we all enroll in certain classes. So if you fall in love with somebody, that's one way that that Spirit uses the spiritual energy to attract this person to you, because they can assist you and you assist them in their spiritual evolution.
Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Feel Good, the podcast. I'm your host, Malika Lee, and today I'm so excited to have with me two of my teachers. Welcome, Ron and Mary.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Malika. It's wonderful to be with you.
And to see you doing this.
Oh, thank you. I actually started this in one of your classes.
Wonderful.
Today, we'll be talking about partners in purpose. So let me tell you a little bit more about why my guests are, I think personally, the best people that I know to talk about this topic with. So a quick rundown, and I'm sure you'll learn more about them as our conversation continues. But just to whet your appetite a little bit, Doctors Ron and Mary Hulnick are world-renowned pioneers and leaders in the field of spiritual psychology. Together for more than 40 years, they have served as founding faculty and co-directors of the University of Santa Monica, which offers pioneering experiential educational programs in spiritual psychology. Together, they have supported more than 6,500 graduates. Their work assists those who partake in nothing less than transforming their consciousness and thereby transforming their lives. They have also authored 2 books together. Okay, so we're going to start kind of at the now and then maybe work our way backwards. So can you tell our listeners, for those of them that are not familiar, what is spiritual psychology?
Well, psychology has been defined as the study of mind and behavior. However, if you look at the definition of psychology, you find in there spirit, soul. Well, what happened? Why did it go to mind and behavior? Well, because the way that we were going in education, having to do with science and the way we know things, there was no way that a mind-based approach can deal with spirit. And so that's why they went over to what they went over to. So we thought, well, time to bring the spirit back into psychology. So by attaching the word spiritual psychology makes it whole again and brings it back to what it was originally designed to be.
And we also speak of spiritual psychology as the art and practice of conscious awakening. And awakening means what? Awakening into the awareness of our essential spiritual nature. One of the foundational principles of spiritual psychology is that we're divine beings having and using a human experience for the purpose of awakening. And awakening means essentially remembering our essential loving nature.
Yeah.
What Ron was referring to, psychology includes the word psyche within it. And psyche is what means breath, principle of life, spirit. And Ron's first teacher told him that psychology was really brought onto the planet to help us, to help humanity remember why we're here, the purpose of why we're here, that we're actually here to learn, to be more loving, to grow in wisdom, to heal patterns that we came to learn and grow through and heal. And so the principles and practices of spiritual psychology that we've been bringing forward for over 40 years now really are in service to that intention.
Wow. So I'm curious. I took some psychology classes. I almost changed my major in undergrad. And it's funny, the running joke was that everybody in the psychology department was crazy, like all the professors. And I went to talk to one professor for counsel when I was thinking of changing my major. And after that conversation, I was like, no, I'll just keep taking the classes and stick to my degrees in economics. From the classes I've taken, I'm curious how you go from what you just described as spiritual psychology to the classes that I was taking about, with Freud and some of those very interesting theories about women and penis envy. And, I didn't learn any of the things that you were speaking about. And your backgrounds, if you don't mind sharing with our listeners, what your doctorates are in. And then can we start to build the bridge a little bit of how you went from that training to spiritual psychology?
Well, my PhD is in counseling and guidance. And I had a choice really whether I was going to pursue a degree in counseling psychology or counseling and guidance. And at the time, it was kind of a difficult decision. But in retrospect, I'm so glad that I did, because to me, our work is very deeply rooted in the spiritual, in spiritual principles. And part of what I see as the essential difference, it's like you begin from a different premise. Psychology really can, unfortunately, fall into the trap of looking at what the issues are. If you consider the diagnostic and statistical manual used by psychologists around the world, there are so many diagnoses in there. And yet there's nothing that talks about the essential wholeness and holiness that is present within each person, nor about the giftedness, because from our perspective, each one of us comes to what we consider Earth, the Earth School, with a very unique curriculum. And that includes the issues that we came to learn and grow through, but it also includes the gifts that we came to share, the things we're here to contribute. And both of those are incredibly important. And in our experience of working with people all these years, part of what I love, Malika, it's like I just didn't want to be with people and just talk with them about their issues. So very early in our work, we really implemented something where we encourage people to bring forward their heartfelt dreams, because very often, if not invariably, their heartfelt dreams are connected to their giftedness. And when people begin to connect with their giftedness, there's a deeper experience of purpose, of meaning, of something greater within them that they're seeking to express. And what happens in my experience, as people become more engaged in that, then the issues start to fall away. And what remains is a human being. Yes, they may still have challenges. They may still have certain patterns in consciousness, but they are no longer really bound by the misidentification with them as being who they are.
Mm-hmm. That's deep, Mary. Ron, you have to follow that.
My track was a little different.
Okay.
Actually, I think it was a lot different. I got my master's degree in clinical psychology, and then I went on to, I thought, take the next step since I was involved in business at that time. Actually, if you can believe this, I worked in a chemical company, but that was largely because my dad was the president and I was going to inherit the whole thing. But I started to get more and more, it wasn't very interesting to me.
Mhm.
And I decided to go back to school and get my doctorate. And it was around that time, in that sequence of things, that I was drawn out to New Mexico, and I met this woman who was a spiritual teacher by the name of Dr. Diva Del Hunter, and she was clairvoyant who gave readings, and I just was taken in by the whole thing. I just felt very, very drawn to that world that she was living in. And so I decided, after a considerable period of time, to just quit the business, make the best deal I could, and move out to New Mexico and serve her, which is what I did. And one of the things that would happen, that went on, by the way, for 5 years.
Which part? Getting to the decision or
From the
studying?
time I went to New Mexico until that training was over.
Gotcha.
That went on for 5 years. And it was not what I'd call a necessarily pleasant experience. Teachers don't mess around with, of that stripe. Don't mess around with their students. They really are going for it. As John Roger, who we met later, used to say, to a tough steak comes a sharp knife.
Mm-hmm.
I thought was very accurate in my case. Every morning we would gather in her bedroom early in the morning. There were about 4 or 5 of us who were students, because she spent the early morning hour with her teacher. And we would all come in there. Do you have a message for us? Is there any messages for, when I think back of it, I go, oh my God, how terrible that was. Someone wakes up at 7 o'clock in the morning and run to their bedrooms. Any messages? So one day she says, there's a message for you. Oh my God, what is it? Well, the message is that I'm to go back to school to get my doctorate. That was the last thing I wanted to hear. Why in the world would I ever want to do that? And she said, it's not that you're going to really learn anything, but it will put you into position now, having a doctorate degree, that is going to serve you in the work that you are going to be doing in the future. Well, okay, I said yes, and I enrolled down in New Mexico State University in Las Cruces.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
What was harder, leaving the chemical plant? Because I imagine there were some things, especially with the family and expectations. I'm sure that was more challenging than you've delved into. But what was harder, leaving that or following her suggestion of going to get your doctorate?
Leaving the company, because this was supposed to be my life.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't working for me. Several years to really come to that decision.
Yeah.
So fast forward, I get accepted to New Mexico State University, and I thought, gee, it would be a smart thing to do to go around and sit in on each of the teachers that I'm going to be working with to get a sense of, what they're all about and what they're doing. So I started to do that. And one evening, I'm waiting there at the front door of this particular teacher who we were going to start that class pretty soon, so I could get her permission to sit in. So here she comes, and I introduce myself, and she looks at me kind of strange. Well, guess who that was?
Was it Mary?
Yeah. She recognized me as, wow, it's something, this is different. But she said yes. And so I went in, sat in on the class. Then I started going into the classes, and I was in her classes as well as everybody else. So we got to know each other as student teacher, but I had a feeling about her. And so very often I would write questions at the end of my home assignments to kind of see where she was at with this stuff. I never got an answer that ruled her out, so to speak. Every answer I got was, well, what you're bringing forward is very interesting. Is that kind of thing. The way I see that is this, and she'd give me an honest opinion. And so that went on for 3 years.
Wow.
How long it took to get the degree. So each of those years I was in one class with her. And so we were building a kind of a friendship. It wasn't a relationship thing. It just was a very collegial relationship.
So above board, basically, is what you're getting at.
Very much above board.
Yeah.
And then comes time to graduate.
Can I ask Mary really quickly before we go to the graduation? I'm just curious because Ron said, Mary, that when you looked at him, there was something you saw in him when you first met. And I'm just curious what that was for you.
Well, I had a sense of recognition that somehow I recognized him. And I had the impression inwardly that he would be very important in my life. I really didn't know how, but I had the sense that he would be important. And so it was unsettling to meet him, to actually encounter him. And when he asked me if he could observe my class that evening, I said to him, well, why would you want to do that? How unsettled and rattled I was. And he looked at me and he repeated the question. Of course, I regained my composure. And I said to him, well, of course, have a seat in the back. And I didn't see him again for a few months following that, at which time then he started the doctoral program. And he was a student in a small doctoral seminar I was teaching.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay, Ron, so graduation time.
Graduation time. And by this time, we were really getting to be good friends and thinking in terms of possibly doing something together. So I'm graduating. Well, it just so happened that there was an opening in our department for what they call a visiting assistant professor. They offered me that job. Well, I accepted immediately, because that was in line with more of what I was interested in. And of course, my office turned out the only empty office in the department was right next to Mary's office. So we started to become even better friends because now we could talk about collegial things that interested in us both. And from there, it just kept moving forward. And then we got clearer, we wanted to do something together. And then there came a time, because they were grooming Mary to be what was the name of that?
Well, I would have become chair of the department and
then,
dean of that college. And eventually it was clear I would have been the academic vice president of that university.
Of the whole university.
And it was at a time where they were looking for women to move into positions of leadership in the university. And Ron was, as he said, he was a visiting professor for 2 years. But at the end of that time, they wanted to move him out of the department because I was going to be promoted to be the department chair.
And you can't have the department chair being, let's say, close friends with one of the faculty.
Well, and by this time we were married.
Oh, whoa.
Wait
a minute, Ron. There were some gaps in this.
I was getting to that.
You're getting to that. Okay.
So as you might imagine, we were getting closer and closer.
Right.
Mary's marriage wasn't really working out that well. It wasn't that there was anything really wrong with it. They just really weren't in the same boat.
Mhm.
And what happened was that the divorce kept getting put off, because things just kept happening. The lawyer's secretary was on vacation or visiting there, and she was in no rush. I mean, there was no urgency. So it just lingered and lingered and lingered. Meanwhile, Dr. Hunter had had a major stroke, which had left her pretty well invalid. And this went on, by this time, it was about a year. And one day she gets a call from
I get a call.
Mary gets a call from the lawyer. Well, today is the day you've been waiting for. Just come into the office, sign the paper, and you're free.
Mhm.
Within 10 minutes, no kidding, 10 minutes, she gets a call from me letting her know that Dr. Hunter had passed over.
Mm.
So it's like we're both free at exactly the same time.
Mhm. Dr. Hunter was your teacher though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah. So, we just turned and faced each other. It was like, what shall we do next?
Mm. Mhm.
And then the next step of this story was we went on for some time and finally met John Roger after taking an insight seminar together. And that was the beginning of it. And one day we were having a meeting with him, and he started talking about this school that they had started called Kohinoor University.
Mhm.
Never taught any courses, never had any action, because they were waiting for the right people to come forward. And so as things just kept progressing and progressing and progressing, he was telling us about this school in this meeting. And we fly back to New Mexico. The next morning, Mary is out walking in the garden at 5 a.m. with our dogs. And I come out, I go, what are you doing out here this early? And she just says, I think we're supposed to do that university.
Mm.
I'm going, whoa, really? Mary got the clue first.
Oh, so can I have a couple of questions going back to the process of the friendship, and then you mentioned Dr. Hunter passed away and you both became free. Were you dating Dr. Hunter? When you say
No, no,
free,
no,
what do
no,
you
no.
mean? What do you mean romantically, or what did that
I'm
mean?
sorry. She had had a stroke.
Mhm.
I was with her at the time she had the stroke that paralyzed her just about as close to 100% you could be paralyzed.
Mhm.
And there was a teacher a nurse at the hospital on our staff. There were two of them, actually, three of them. So I called them up. They came over. We need to go to the hospital. And she hated hospitals because they
Mhm.
were typically filled with sick people. She didn't like being in that energy. Her hand was like, clenched in the bed. I put my finger inside her hand and I said, Dr. Hunter, if you can respond to me, just press my finger once. And she pressed it. So we had communication.
Mhm.
So then I said, all right, here we go. Press yes for once and no for twice. Do you want us to take you to the hospital? 1, 2, no.
Mhm.
The doctor said, well, no problem, really. We have nurses on our staff here. There's nothing to prevent us from just turning the bedroom into a hospital room.
Mhm. Mhm.
I can get all the equipment here and all the meds that we're going to need. It's really no problem.
So you
So
became like a caregiver?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
that's what it became. And, she could never be left alone.
Mhm.
And it took her about a year to get to the place where she could be in a wheelchair and, sluttering, get talk. But if she started to get agitated, it would immediately become garbled.
Mhm.
She had already met Mary Dr. Hunter did.
Okay.
She used Mary had a challenging client, so Dr. Hunter used that as an excuse. Oh, I've worked with a person who was in exactly that situation.
Mhm.
Tell Mary if she'd be interested, I'll go down and talk with her about it.
Mhm.
Mary said yes. So they met,
Mhm.
and I really think Dr. Hunter was just trying to see if this was going to be a good thing. So,
I think
you know,
I think part of it, I think it's in many spiritual traditions, as the teacher ages, the
Mhm.
students care for the teacher. And in the lineage that Ron was in at that time, that was what occurred. Not only he, but some of the other students then really became devoted to the care of this woman who had been their teacher.
That's really a beautiful act of service that I'm
Yes.
not familiar with in modern day,
Yes.
teaching dynamics.
we should write that up. I don't think we've ever written that story up.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Okay, so I have so many questions going back to I'm gonna go over the romance part for now. We're gonna focus on the purpose, but the romance part is an interesting partnership in and of itself. So do you all believe in soulmates? And if so, do you think you all are soulmates? And how do you define soulmates?
Well, that is such a great question. And my answer is yes and no.
Okay.
Me too.
No. And part of it is because I think soulmates is a term that is largely misunderstood. I think it can fall into the realm of the romantic ideal. We're meant to be together. And I think that can lead to a lot of illusion about relationship, about the other person. And from our perspective, in a relationship, what brings people together is matching energy.
Mhm.
And initially, it tends to be the positive matching energy, all the beautiful, wonderful things that you see in the other person. And in a way, it's wonderful that that occurs because it's almost like the veil lifts and you really get to see and experience the soul essence in the other person and just fall into love with them and that. But there's the other part of the matching energy, which really has to do with the dovetailing patterns. So, for example, if somebody has a pattern of abandonment and rejection, then they need to draw to them a person who will play out that story in the relationship with them, so they have the opportunity to learn and grow and ultimately to heal and let go of that particular story of illusion and separation.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's interesting that, getting ready for this, I just went to my dictionary,
Mhm.
standard dictionary, going back to 1966, the volume I have. I looked up soulmate, and it simply said a person with whom one has a strong affinity, especially a person of the opposite sex. That's all it said about that. And then it said a sexual partner in an illicit relationship,
Mhm.
one's lover or mistress.
Mhm.
So I thought, gee, I don't think that's the definition that most people would ascribe to it today.
No,
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I think people often take it to mean, oh, this means we're meant together, we're soulmates. And they really can put such a projection over it that it really can cloud the lens of perception and lead to how can I say, overlooking certain things,
Right, right.
projecting certain things onto the person and the situation, the relationship that may not actually be there at all.
Mhm.
So So from our point of view, relationship is really one of the most exquisite opportunities on the planet, really to share the loving, to share life. In our case, to do good work together, to be of service,
And
to create something that then becomes a contribution to humanity.
Yes, that's juicy.
and you've heard us say many times, Earth is a school for the evolution of consciousness. And so we're all using the school analogy, we all enroll in certain classes. So if you fall in love with somebody, that's one way that that spirit uses the spiritual energy to attract this person to you, because they can assist you and you assist them in their spiritual evolution. So they're going to use attraction. So we're attracted to that person. And we can build on that attraction, if that's what we're learning, is just to be more loving. And I know a couple of people who have that as their curriculum. But most of the time, we're attracted to people so that we can work out certain specific issues. And we know that these two souls will attract each other along that line because they have very similar unresolved issues. So it's one of the ways to get people into the same class where they have the potential of maximum benefit.
Right. So you all mentioned there are so many layers in that soulmate, the answer. And I'm wondering, from the attraction standpoint, you spoke about the attraction of the friendship and that there was some kind of recognition, something's happening here. So I'm just curious, who made the first move? Who got bit by the love bug first? And given the work relationship, the dynamics of how did you build that bridge from the friendship to exploring that there might be more there?
I don't know that it.
I think really we were smitten at the same time. When I look back on it, Malika, I would say we were smitten at the same time. And part of it, for some time, I had felt like the marriage I was in wasn't really fulfilling for me, that there wasn't enough shared purpose. There weren't enough shared values. And I really began asking Spirit to bring forward a partner that would be someone I could work with. I knew my work was going to be very important in my life, even though at that time, I had no idea that I would become involved in starting a school that would teach programs in spiritual psychology and what all of that would become. But it was so interesting when Ron first began to take classes with me as a student, I recognized that many of the ways that we saw things were very similar. I remember he wrote, when he was completing his doctoral dissertation, he wrote a beautiful article called Counselor, Know Thyself. Counselor, Know Thyself, which just was very deep and definitely had a spiritual understanding and energy within it. And so there was clearly a shared resonance. And if I were to look back on our lives together, I would say that really we were destined to be together. We were destined to come to start this school, to bring forward this work on the planet at this time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel that resonance as a former student and lifelong, I guess, student, if you ever really finish, right? Because life is school. Yeah. But I would agree with you on that. And so you mentioned, because some of us are still looking for our people. I think I'm one of those, romantically, purposefully, like both. I'm still looking for my people. And you mentioned shared values and you mentioned shared purpose. What are some things that those who are still looking like should be looking for from your experiences?
Well, rather than what you're looking for, I would be encouraging prayer,
Mm,
prayer, asking Spirit to bring forward your life partner
mhm,
in accordance with your highest good. So that simple, heartfelt prayer. And the other thing I would be encouraging is continue to do your own inner work.
mhm.
In other words, the
Right.
refining, the healing, the transformation of your own consciousness, because the outer proceeds from the inner.
Mhm.
And so like attracts like. And I would also encourage getting clear about your own path of service. What is the path that really has joy, that has heart, that you experience meaning and fulfillment?
Mhm.
And then look around and see who else is engaged and participating in that. Not that it needs to be that way, because sometimes people have powerful love and connection, and really their path of service may be complementary or even quite different. But for us, obviously, ours were one path. We
So-
each had our own unique gifts and contributions to make to it, but we had a shared mission that
But
we would
we-
both contribute to.
We certainly didn't recognize that. I mean, consciously recognize that when we met, or for several years going forward, as I progressed through the doctoral education process. Part of it is faith.
Faith. Yeah. And you had mentioned
Lord,
before,
thy will be done.
thy
Lord,
will be done. Surrender.
yeah.
Yes, surrender.
And you had mentioned, Ron, before in a class that you were on this spiritual path, as you shared with us in this conversation, and you kind of wondered if a relationship with Mary would detract you or distract you from that path. And so I'm wondering, how did you come to a place within yourself to continue in that relationship with Mary? Because I know your spiritual development was also very important to you.
See, it was just a natural progression. It wasn't something I thought about. Things just kept happening that were adding one positive experience after another one, at least for me.
Yes. Well, let me just share another piece of the story, because after we had taken Insight One, before Insight One even started, we were taking it with a friend of ours who also lived in New Mexico.
And who was part of the Dr. Hunter thing.
Okay.
And we were here in Los Angeles. We were going to be taking the seminar together, and we were waiting for the ballroom doors to open so we could go in to participate in the seminar. And our friend already knew John Roger. And at some point he said, "Oh, there goes John Roger." It's like John Roger had just turned the corner and was coming down the corridor towards us and towards the ballroom doors. Well, he came right over to us, Malika. And our friend introduced us, and Ron and our friend asked John Roger if they might be able to have a meeting with him after the seminar was over. And JR said, yes. And he got out his little book.
He was doing his own appointments at that time.
At that time.
Mhm.
He had a little pen, and he said, "Now who's going to be at this meeting?" And our friend said he would be, and Ron said he would be. I didn't say anything because I was teaching summer school and I was not scheduled to be in LA at the time of the meeting. And he turned to me and he said, "What about you?" I said to him, "If you can imagine this, Malika," I said, "Oh, I'm really much too busy." And he just looked at me in the sweetest way and he smiled and he said, "Well, let me put your name down here. So in case you'd like to be at this meeting, you could be." So he put my name down. Well, by the time the seminar was over And I really got a sense not only of the energy field that was present, but of him and what an extraordinary teacher he was and the kind of spiritual gifts he had. It was clear I would be at that meeting. So in that meeting, initially it was with his entire staff. And Ron and Robert asked various questions at that time. But then John Roger dismissed the staff and we were able to have personal time with him. So at that point, Ron asked him, he said, Mary and I are thinking of being married. And John Roger said, oh, an impersonal, personal relationship. That gave me a lot to think about for quite some time.
I thought personal, impersonal relationship.
Well,
however,
yes. And Ron said to him, well, I have one concern. He said, my concern is that will it interfere with my spiritual progression? And John Roger paused for a moment. He looked at Ron and he said, yes, if you let it. Then there was this pause. Ron didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. And JR looked at us and he said, your energies match.
So personally, I can see where you could do a lot of good work together.
He actually said, I think it would be a good idea. And we learned later that it was very rare for him to say something that directly to a couple. But I think that really allayed the fear that you had, Ron.
Yeah.
And Ron proposed to me later that same day.
Oh my goodness. Ron, did you have the ring on you or you?
No.
Striking while the iron's hot. I appreciate that.
No. I mean, it was very clear. If I heard from him, it's not going to get in my way in terms of my own spiritual progression, which was the most important thing. Why not? Why not?
So do you all have different, because you work together, you live together, now you're working from home and, you spend a lot of time from the outside looking in, it seems like you spend a lot of time together. And I'm wondering if there are certain, let's say, guidelines or containers that you have in your personal life that are different, or are they the same in your professional life? For example, how you handle conflict or a disagreement. How do you all do that personally and or professionally, and do you handle it the same way?
Well, it's such an interesting question. And I think because we've been together so long, that so many of these things have been worked out, the underlying issues. But part of it is, it's like now we really know the importance of meditating and asking what's truly for the highest good. Like when we're making decisions having to do with the school. And we've had to make some very big decisions in the last 5 years, because, for 35 years, we offered master's degree programs in spiritual psychology. And at a certain point, we chose to pursue accreditation. And as we pursued...
Let me say something about that.
All right.
See, what happened was that we were approved by the state of California to grant degrees. That's how we got our authority to do that. So what happened at a certain point was that the state of California decided they were going to let go of that department, because for most people is done by the national. It's not a statewide thing. It's a national thing. So they call that regional accreditation. There are about 5 regions in the country. And so we were assured, we had people from the accrediting agency come in and they knew what we did, and they said, you won't have any problem at all. So we shifted over and started to go for a regional accreditation. And then we find out that, I don't know if it was several months earlier, I think that's what it was.
Well, it probably was at least 6 months into it.
So at least 6 months in, we find out that they had passed legislation that heretofore going forward, what they call experiential education was only going to be valued at half the value of didactic education. We had to choose.
Mhm.
If we were going to go for the accreditation, the regional accreditation, we would have had to convert a significant degree of what we do into just classes where we'd be giving lectures, and a lot of the experiential would just fall away. Well, we were just not willing to do that. We just said, we can't do that.
Because to us, that really would have been a betrayal of the mission of the school, which really was to assist people in awakening, to help them transform their consciousness and to transform their lives. And ours was not just to be an education of the mind and to talk about things, but rather to provide people with experience that was designed to assist them in their own learning, in their own healing, in their own awakening.
And so the choice that we came to after much deliberation and praying and asking for guidance was to convert the master's program into the current format, which
Well,
was a non-degreed program.
Yes, into certificate of completion.
That was a big risk.
It was a huge leap. But, it was one of those decisions that actually was relatively easy for us to make because we knew in our hearts what the intention and purpose of the school was. And we were not going to go against that. And I would say that principle of really attuning, deep listening in the silence, asking for spirit's guidance and inspiration is probably one of the most foundational practices in our partnership, both professionally and personally, Malika. The other thing, if there is conflict or difference, because of the work that we do, we really have so many tools and practices to use. And we understand that if I'm upset, that means there's some unresolved issue inside of me. It doesn't mean there may not be also something external to be clarified and worked out. But the first thing is to take responsibility for your own disturbance and to not project it onto your partner, for me not to project my disturbance onto Ron. And so there's a lot of let's say, maturing and healing and learning that we've done through the years.
And let me relate that to something very current in today's world. Because of all the conflict that is going on, you have a lot of people running around, I am upset because. It's rampant. And they don't seem to have a clue that it doesn't matter which side of the argument they're on. If they're angry and upset about it, they're actually adding to the fight. They're adding to the sum total of the negativity that is present along with that is going on. So, as you well know, as a USM grad, I would say probably the most key thing we work with people on is how to deal with and work with and let go of any negativity about anything. Because as soon as you go, I am upset because, you may as well not go any further. It doesn't matter how good your reasons are. We're sure you've thought them out very well and that makes good sense to you. But it's the fact that you are upset that, from the perspective of spiritual psychology, could be good news if you know how to use that for the purpose of your own healing, which of course is a large part of the program. And involves learning the basic skill of compassionate self-forgiveness. And so as we look around the world today, boy, there is really a lot of opportunity for the implementation of spiritual psychology. But then again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if that triggers people into moving into what they've learned on how to work with that stuff, it could have a huge positive effect insofar as the evolution of consciousness on this planet at this time is concerned.
Yes. There's a lot of, like, if life is a classroom, I'd say, we're in finals week in some ways, it's
Yeah, we're
intensified.
going into a new year.
Yeah. So given some of the things going on in the climate, I'm not sure when I'll be publishing this, but Roe versus Wade just, was overturned by the Supreme Court. So let's explore for a moment, like, gender roles, because that is a societal thing. And then we have our own personal cultures, right? In your family of origins. And I will say that, even in my time, and I think you all come from a certain time where there were specific societal ideas about a woman's role, necessarily a man's role. And one thing that I observed and that stood out in class, for example, is that Mary would publicly disagree with you sometimes, Ron, in class. She might be going down a path and Mary's like, well, hold on, Ron, and say her piece, which was something that I don't see very often couples do in public. A woman may disagree, but generally it's like behind closed doors or, something of that effect. And so I'm wondering, I have a lot of questions about gender roles, but I'm wondering, I guess the opening question, are your families of origin and how have they informed your gender roles first? Even with Mary, being a working woman, and the college was just starting to open up of having women in leadership. There was a time when women didn't really work unless there was war. So I'm just curious, like, what's your family of origin stories around gender roles? And then we'll move into how it plays out in your relationship.
Yes. Well, it's so interesting because I feel both my parents really encouraged me to be all I could be. I think initially I was encouraged in what would be considered traditional gender roles: teacher, nurse, secretary, things of that nature. And after I completed my master's degree, the man who was my major professor and I were having a meeting, and he talked with me about going on and getting my doctorate, which is not really something I had contemplated, Malika. And I went home, I thought about it for 3 days, and inwardly it felt aligned. And I went back and met with him and told him I would do it, little knowing what doors that was going to be opening for my future, not consciously having any awareness of it. And at times it was challenging. I got my doctorate and my master's at Iowa State University, which at that time and still is a university of science and technology. The ratio of men to women on that campus was 7-1.
Wow.
And I can remember, and I had to take 26 hours of graduate level statistics in the statistics department. And I remember the first day going to one of those classes, and I sat right in the front row because I didn't want to miss anything. And when the room filled, I looked around, I was the only woman in there. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Fortunately, there were some men from my department who were also in the class. And after class, we would go and have coffee together. And so I felt supported, but I felt very called to do what I was doing. And so even though at times it was uncomfortable, I didn't feel limited by it. I really did not feel any kind of doors that weren't open to me I felt, if anything, I received a great deal of support and encouragement. And I just think about my professional path prior to USM. It's like I didn't have againstness towards men. I didn't feel a rivalry or competition with my first professional position was in a university counseling center. It was all men and me. In the summer, I taught in their counselor education program, all men and me. And so it was, it's like I was comfortable within myself in who I was, in what I was about and doing. And I also feel that my professional choice was a natural expression of qualities that are inherent within me. And so it all felt very balanced. I don't know if I'm answering the question that you're asking.
You are, and I'm curious, like, did your mom work?
When I was a young child, my mom did not start working until I was probably maybe a junior in high school. I had 2 sisters and a brother, so there were 4 children. I would say my mom was totally devoted to being a wonderful stay-at-home mom and really supporting us. And she was an intelligent, gifted woman. After I completed my doctorate, she went back and got a master's degree.
Oh, wow.
Special education in the area of learning disabilities. She worked until she was 75 years old, working with young children with learning disabilities. And so to me, she was very comfortable with the choice that she made. In fact, in my closet upstairs, I have a framed picture that I found in my parents' home when I was cleaning it out, settling their estate. And it's a picture of a beautiful picture of a baby. And on the back of that picture is my mom's name and the date. And she got that. Obviously, that was an ideal scene for her before any of my brothers, sisters, or myself were born. So that was a very heartfelt thing. And she was a loving mom. It's like, I think of all the ways that she cared for me, shaped me, helped me, grow me. I had challenges. I had polio when I was 2 years old. My mom and my grandmother and a Catholic sister cared for me and did a treatment known as the Sister Kinney treatment. And I had no atrophy of my limbs, none, and fully recovered. I did have to learn how to walk again, but I was very well cared for and loved. I had a serious eye condition, a strabismus. I really only saw through one eye, Malika. My mom saw to it that I was a master reader. Every morning she would curl my hair for me. And part of the ritual when we were doing that process was that I would have a book. She would read one page and I would read the next page. So it's like I feel I was nurtured in the natural expression of who I am, and that my mom honored her own calling, both as a mother, a homemaker, and then eventually in the work that she did with children with learning disabilities.
I got that. That's really beautiful to hear both sides of her calling and to see that in you, Mary, like that lineage.
Yes.
I can really see that. Yeah. And what about you, Ron?
With respect to what?
We were talking about gender roles and family of origin. Like, what were you indoctrinated with? And whether you grew up in it, you could have believed it or not? Like, did your mom work? Because it sounds like you were willing to learn from powerful women.
My mom didn't work
Mhm.
for the entire time. She didn't have to because my dad was the head of this chemical company.
Mhm.
And she pretty much was very content to be at home and just do those kinds of things. The one thing she did do, she got involved in this group called the Women's League for Israel, because we come from a Jewish background. And although, I've never really felt a kinship to that, I'm not against it. I just, it doesn't ring to me as something I want to pursue.
Mhm.
But my dad was the one who I spent most of the time with because we worked together for over 10 years.
Mhm.
And so I more or less followed him in many ways, although there are qualities that I got from my mom. My mom was the major person I had challenges with. I just think I came in with something about women that was inherently, uh, I had challenges in that area. And that has taken me a long time to really work with. And these days, I really have a sense of appreciation, well, for both of them.
Mhm.
But for her, because it was when I realized that I got certain things from her, not from my dad. It was very clear. For example, her sense of humor,
Mhm.
that comes from her.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing that comes from her is, let's see, there was another big one that
Her
sense
love
of
of
humor,
music.
love of music.
Yes.
Mhm.
That was a big one. She insisted I learn how to play the piano,
Mm.
and many people don't know it. Some of them do. When we were in the Brentwood Ballroom, we had a piano there. And there were times I'd just go and play it. But that really wasn't an important part of my life up until, of course, growing up was, but at our wedding, one of the people who were there asked my mom, how is it that he grew up where he just seems to be very kind and generous. She said, why would he not be? He got everything he asked for. So I look back upon that, and by and large, that was accurate.
Mhm.
But I also learned good values.
Mhm.
I learned the value of working and getting good at what you do and all of those kinds of things.
Mhm.
What I would add about Ron's mom, really, she was the matriarch of her family, of an extended family.
Mhm.
And also she was president of the Women's League for Israel
In Brooklyn.
in New York City.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so she had leadership ability in her own right, particularly for causes that she believed in.
Mhm. And Ron, you mentioned having some issues with women, and I'm wondering, as much as you'd like to share, how you were able to work through those, because it doesn't seem apparent that that's still present in you, especially to be married to a woman like Mary who stands in her power. And I don't sense that you're threatened by that at all, where
No.
some men can be, right? So I'm curious to explore your take on that in your journey, whatever it was which you were referencing about with women.
Well, see, what really freed me was the more I started to get involved in the whole spiritual thing that we now teach.
Mhm.
And probably the most important principle having to do with that is an unresolved issue is anything that disturbs your peace. So as long as I could look at a picture of her and not feel anything other than love,
Mhm.
I knew there was something inside that I had to work on. And it took me years to work on that and really put it to rest.
Mhm. Mhm.
And not the least of which was my mom spent a lot of time toward the end of her life. She lived till 97,
Wow.
just sitting in a chair and not being aware of anything going on around her.
Mhm.
And we had to, work with that. And there was nothing that I could do other than learn how to be more and more and more loving. Nothing I could demand from her. But as leading up to that, for many years, I would go visit her, and because she moved out here finally, and I'd go visit her. We would both go visit her, but I would go more. And just one of those things that nurtured over time. But I could tell you, no kidding, it's because I practiced what we teach today, that anything that disturbs your peace is an unresolved issue waiting for you to resolve it. In fact, it's why you're here. It's one of the reasons you're here.
It sounds like your issue with women was localized to your mom and not to women in general. Is that accurate or no?
I would say so, but if it's generalized to the feminine, it's going to play a role in everything.
Exactly.
And so I never had a relationship with a woman in all the time I grew up where I was really okay with everything.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's like in a way, there's nothing that Mary can do that disturbs my peace. And it doesn't have anything to do with Mary, really. It has to do with the more you're in a place of peace,
right,
then if you're really at a place of peace, you're at a place of peace. And things can try to rattle that and test you on it. If you're really in a place of peace, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, and then finally, apparently all of the time, or what seems to be, you just stay in a place of peace. Doesn't mean you don't disagree with things that are going on. Doesn't mean you don't try to alter them. It just means that you don't move into a place of upset and use that as your reason to get angry at what's going on.
Right.
I mean, if ever there was something that we need more of in this world, it's the understanding of what peace really is and how to go about. Everybody has it. How to go about discovering where that is inside and learning to live there.
Yeah, I agree. There's like we talked about before, there are many opportunities to practice and to notice upsets and when we're not at peace. So I'm still on this gender role thing. I think part of it, just to share a little bit of my background, is that my parents were never married. In fact, I was thinking about it, I was like, I don't have a single picture with the three of us together, and I'm each of their only kid. And so I'm used to whoever I'm living with, right? Because I've lived with both my parents, wearing all the hats and taking care of all of it, right? And so like in your dance and partnership, like with the gender roles, for example, is the same person always responsible for what are we going to eat for dinner? You guys have both worked side by side all day. You know what I mean? Like, because even some of my friends that are, in a younger generation, both of them work, and there's an understanding that the woman still is going to be the one who carries the bulk of the responsibility at home, the cooking, the cleaning, childcare, all of those things. And so I'm wondering, because you all are both working all day, and how does that part of your relationship play out, and how do you all maintain balance?
I think it's very simple. I let Mary decide all those things. Because, see, to me, it doesn't really make a difference.
I would say that we're quite fluid. We are quite fluid and flexible. And maybe I have more responsibility relative to thinking ahead to meals and that kind of thing. But we have a lot of fluidity in this. And we're also very blessed to have help. So we have housekeepers, we have personal assistants, so we have a lot of support, which is really wonderful because our work has involved a lot of responsibility and a lot of commitment of time and energy. And so to have others around us that help keep many of the day-to-day maintenance aspects of our life running smoothly is such a gift and blessing. I'm eternally grateful to the people, our staff at USM, our personal staff, you know, all of the people, our gardener, our housekeepers. I mean, these people are amazing gifts.
In service, so that you can all be of service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For the highest good. I get that. So I'm wondering, I know our time is coming to an end. I have a couple of wrap-up questions. And one is, has your purpose as because you didn't know about USM or, you know, all of these things that came into fruition after you all came together and just kind of walked through it, right? The unfolding of it. And so I'm wondering, has your purpose changed from when you all first came together? And if so, how do you continue to still grow together in this work?
Well, to me, I'll
Good
answer first. I would say my personal purpose has deepened tremendously. And I would say my primary purpose at this time is spiritual. At this stage of my life, this time really is a time to focus inwardly. It's a time, yes, to continue to be of service to others, but to really look within. It's like now it's time to turn my eyes more homeward, deepen in my knowing of God and residing in that consciousness. And I don't see that in any ways in opposition to the work that we do through the university. It just deepens it. It deepens it. It adds more richness, more dimensionality. It's like the USM energy field only continues to elevate and to deepen as our consciousness also elevates and deepens. I think when I was younger, yes, my own spiritual progression was very important, and I saw it as parallel, but now I would say it's the main event.
I would pretty much say the same thing. I mean, it's just what the experience is, one where you realize that everything that's going on in this world is of this world, but we are not. See, we are here using this earth as a school, as you well know, and we've just started to formulate a new way of presenting this, which we haven't quite finished yet, but an idea for many people, which is erroneous, is what our friend Michael Hayes calls the myth of becoming.
The great path of becoming.
The great path of becoming. So we're becoming more awake, we're becoming this, we're becoming more loving. But the truth of the matter is you can't become something you already are. So it really becomes starting to learn how to work in a reality where you can accept that the loving is really all there is, and you can be in the loving and still be upset. It's not that one excludes the other. See, it's not that you move from one to the other. You've only moved in the awareness of one versus the other. And it's not really even a versus. And so you can be in the loving and you may still appear to be disturbed about something. It doesn't mean that you are not still in the loving. You can't not be in the loving because it is the essence of everything. And we come into this incarnation, into a physical world reality, because you have to have a positive and a negative in order to have things you can work on. There's nothing to work on in the loving. And so this is, to me, this is the major benefit of the work that, that we've been doing all this time. But who knew it was going to come to this when we started? I sure didn't. I doubt that Mary did.
So it sounds like, has that always been your purpose, Ron? Because I was wondering, because going back to like your purpose when you all first met, right? If you're partners in purpose, and now it's grown. The Ron I'm hearing now, I'm guessing 40 years ago didn't have that same level of insight and awareness. And so,
I
yeah.
may have had the same level of insight, but it was insight that was based in a mental awareness. The awakening process is one where you simply become aware of the deeper loving level that was always there, but you weren't aware of it except every now and then.
Right.
You'd have a loving experience. So it's awakening into the realization, real eyes, to see with eyes that see really,
Yeah.
that's really, that the nature of it all is loving.
Mm-hmm.
And our job is to reveal that to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I had an experience with this last evening. I love the Westminster Dog Show. It occurs annually. It went on last week. I didn't get to watch it then, so I was watching part of it. And all of a sudden, I had this God moment. It was so extraordinary. I just went into this incredible love. I saw all of these beautiful dogs. I saw the handlers. I saw everyone that was part of it, and just the incredible love that infused this entire creation. And it was extraordinary. I mean, it was just such an elevated moment, and it just brought tears to my eyes because of the beauty of the love
Mm-hmm.
that has made that particular event and focus manifest all these years. And, it's simple and yet so profound.
Yeah. Ooh, I had an experience preparing for our conversation of meditation and being overwhelmed with loving for the both of you, and appreciation. So you stirred that loving up in me again, listening to you talk about the dogs. But as we wrap up, what are some things that I haven't asked that you'd like to speak to as we close out this conversation?
See, really, the questions you've asked have been excellent. The really important things don't have to do with the answers to those questions. It has to do with people who are listening to this, hopefully coming away with the experience of, oh, I never thought about it that way. That's something I'm going to have to give more consideration, because the more that anybody moves in that direction, the more loving they are going to become with anybody who is in their life, regardless. Doesn't have to do with sex, doesn't have to do with anything else, really, because everything else serves that one purpose, which is generally referred to as awakening.
To me, your questions have really been lovely, lovely questions. And, I don't have anything inside of me about something that I wish you would have asked. If I were to reiterate anything, it would be 3 simple keys. 1, make the loving the most important thing. The second is tell the truth. Have a safe and sacred space, whether it's a professional relationship or a personal partnership, where you can talk authentically, honestly, and there's a safe and sacred space where you can share your truth, that you can be heard and you can hear your partner. And out of that often will come just a much deeper understanding and deeper level of intimacy. And the third key, I would say, is continually ask to be shown your path of service and what is truly for the highest good. Because that question helps get ego out of the way.
Wow. Well, you've heard it here. You have been listening to a wonderful conversation of Partners in Purpose with my guests, Drs. Ron and Mary Hulnick. And I did not ask, I mentioned USM for 40 years, but how long have you all been married?
43 years.
43 years. Okay. Married for 43 years, working together at University of Santa Monica for 40 years. And if you'd like to find out more about the school, you can go to University of Santa Monica.edu. Thank you, Ron. And you can find, they've co-authored 2 books that I mentioned in the opening. Remembering the Light Within is one of their books, and Loyalty to Your Soul. You can find both of their books on Amazon and anywhere else where books are sold. Is there anything else that you all would like to mention about offerings before we close out?
Yes, we will be offering a 3-day online Loyalty to Your Soul workshop, September 9th, 10th, and 11th. And it's a wonderful introduction to this work. It's that particular event is fully loaded. It really includes what we consider the most quintessential principles and practices put together in an experiential learning format so that people can really make them their own.
And even if someone has taken the workshop or knows about all of this, there's nothing like going back and experiencing it again to reinforce it in your own consciousness.
Repetition is the mother of skill. I heard that first from Ayala Van Zant, which is one of the students also from University of Santa Monica. So thank you both so much. With that, we will sign off for now. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and don't forget to follow what feels good.